It started like most betrayals do, not with intent but with hunger, subtle and quiet, like a whisper in a locked room, the kind you don't hear until it's already too late. Her name was Amelia, 34, married, mother of 2 and dangerously bored. Not with her life, not exactly, but with the way it moved like a train on predictable tracks. Wake up, dress the kids, clean the countertops, reply to emails with dry politeness, wait for her husband to return from work only to eat together in silence as the TV buzzed behind them like static in a dream. She loved Daniel in the way one loves a dependable roof. He protected her, paid the mortgage, never raised his voice, never questioned her choices. But he also never looked at her the way he used to. He hadn't since the second child. And over time, Amelia felt herself become invisible not just to him but to the world. A faded shape in family photos, a blur in supermarket aisles. So when she signed up for Jiu-Jitsu, it wasn't about fitness, not really. It was about feeling something again. She chose the gym at the edge of town, not the polished kind with mirrors and neon, but one with sweat-stained mats and dim lighting. Raw, intimate, a place where people went not to pose but to fight. That's where she met him. Luca with black belt. 38. Hands like granite, voice like gravel dipped in honey. His eyes didn't scan the room like other men's eyes did. He spoke little, but when he did it felt like every word had weight. On her first day when she stumbled during warm-ups, he didn't laugh or look away. He reached out, lifted her by the wrist and said, "You'll get stronger. You will." No one had spoken to her like that in years. Not her husband, not her colleagues, not even herself. It was a promise she didn't know she was desperate to hear. From that day the gym became a sanctuary, the only place she didn't feel like a ghost. She stayed late, asked questions, offered to clean the mats just to be near him a little longer. It started with innocent drills. Mount escapes, guard passes. But human contact is a dangerous thing. Skin remembers what minds try to forget. His hands on her hips during takedowns, the feel of his breath during side control, the unspoken electricity humming beneath every roll. They said nothing for weeks. Nothing obvious. But everything changed the night of the storm. The gym was empty, lights flickering, rain hammering the rooftop like a warning. She had stayed late. He offered to lock up. She hesitated, then said she could help. They rolled one last time, slower this time, as if something sacred was being tested. She ended up in mount. He bucked and she laughed. And then, like gravity had plans of its own, their faces were inches apart. "Tap," she whispered. But he didn't. And neither did she. After that night, nothing could ever go back to the way it was. Amelia found herself haunted by the feel of Luca's hands on her skin, the sharp contrast between the warmth of his body and the coldness she'd grown used to at home. Every glance, every accidental brush during practice carried an unspoken promise of something forbidden, something urgent. She began craving those moments of raw physicality like a drug, and soon the gym was no longer just a refuge. It was the only place where she truly felt alive. She started arriving earlier, staying later, making excuses to Luca about soreness, fatigue, or confusion over techniques, but no pretense could hide her growing obsession. Luca, stoic and distant in the daylight, softened in those quiet training sessions, teaching her to trust her strength, her resilience, and in turn she learned to trust herself again. Yet the guilt gnawed at her relentlessly. At home, Daniel remained kind but increasingly distant, absorbed by work and his own frustrations, while Amelia's mind drifted, locked in a secret dance she dared not name. The tension between duty and desire stretched her thin like a wire pulled taut, threatening to snap at any moment. Then came the day when Luca invited her out after practice, not to a bar or a crowded cafe, but to a quiet, almost hidden rooftop garden above the gym, where only the moon and stars bore witness. The air was cool and thick with the scent of rain-soaked leaves, and for the first time, they spoke beyond grappling holds and martial technique. Luca's voice was low, almost a whisper, revealing fragments of his own loneliness, his battles with past mistakes, and the irony of teaching others how to fight while fighting his own demons. Amelia listened, captivated by this man who was no longer just her teacher, but something dangerously close to a confidant. When his hand brushed hers, she didn't pull away. The line between student and teacher blurred, and in that charged silence they crossed it. Their kiss was hesitant at first, like a sparring match with no rules, full of restraint and unspoken questions. But passion overwhelmed caution, and the rooftop became their clandestine sanctuary, a place to taste freedom and betrayal in equal measure. The days that followed were a whirlwind of stolen moments and whispered apologies, the exhilaration of secrecy mingling with crushing waves of remorse. Amelia found herself living two lives, one defined by the cold routine of motherhood and marriage, the other by the fiery, intoxicating escape that Luca offered. She rationalized her actions, telling herself she deserved to feel alive, that she was more than a wife or a mother. But deep inside, the fractures were growing too wide to ignore. One evening, Daniel confronted her with a simple question. "Are you happy?" The weight of those words crushed her. She wanted to scream, to confess everything, but instead she lied, nodding slowly, praying he wouldn't see through her facade. But some truths refused to stay buried. The day Luca's phone lit up with a message from Amelia's husband, unaware of the connection, marked the beginning of the end. When Daniel showed up unannounced at the gym, the quiet space that had been Amelia's refuge became a battlefield. Eyes locked, accusations hung unspoken, and the fragile trust shattered like glass beneath their feet. The aftermath was a storm more brutal than any Amelia had ever faced, a tempest of broken promises and shattered illusions. Yet in the wreckage she understood the cost of passion, the price of escape, and the impossible choice between love and freedom. And as the dust settled, Amelia stood alone, stronger, scarred, but finally awake. The weeks after Daniel's discovery were a blur of cold mornings and silent dinners, each moment heavier than the last, like an ocean pressing down on her chest. Amelia's world, once so carefully compartmentalized, began unraveling at the seams. Daniel's betrayal wasn't the affair itself, it was the betrayal of trust, the shattering of the life they had built together, fragile though it was. His eyes, once warm and familiar, now held a storm of hurt, anger, and confusion, making Amelia feel like a stranger trapped behind a glass wall, watched but never truly seen. She tried to explain, to tell him about the loneliness that had crept in, the yearning for something more than the quiet despair of routine, but the words tangled on her tongue and came out as half-truths, apologies she didn't fully believe. Meanwhile, Luca became an impossible ghost in her mind, his touch a memory that burned and soothed all at once. She wrestled with her own reflection, searching for the woman she used to be before motherhood, before marriage, before she lost herself in the daily grind. The gym remained her only sanctuary, but now it was tinged with guilt and fear. Fear of judgment, of losing everything, and worst of all, fear of herself. Amelia's sessions with Luca grew charged with tension, no longer just physical but emotional. Fragile threads of desire and regret intertwining in every hold, every roll on the mat. One night, after class ended and the others had gone, Luca stopped her with a look that cut through the haze. "You're running," he said softly. She knew he was right. She was running. From Daniel, from herself, from the consequences that loomed like shadows in every corner of her life. In that moment, under the flickering gym lights, Amelia faced the hardest fight yet, not against an opponent on the mat, but against the woman she had become and the choices that would define who she'd be. Luca's presence was both a balm and a challenge, his steady gaze urging her to confront her fears, to stop hiding behind excuses and finally claim her truth. But truth came at a cost. When Daniel served her with divorce papers weeks later, the finality of it stunned Amelia into silence. The house felt too big, the silence too loud, and the future stretched out before her like an uncharted battlefield. She wanted to hate Luca for the chaos he'd brought, but beneath the guilt and regret lay an undeniable gratitude. He'd helped her remember what it meant to be alive, to fight for herself even when the world demanded she surrender. In the quiet aftermath, Amelia began rebuilding, piece by fragile piece, learning that strength wasn't just physical. It was in admitting mistakes, in facing pain, and in daring to love again even if imperfectly. Her story was no longer just about betrayal. It was about survival, growth, and the messy, beautiful complexity of human desire. Months slipped by like whispers, and Amelia found herself standing at a crossroads she never imagined she'd face. The divorce was finalized, and with it came a painful liberation. A severing of ties that had once defined her but now felt like shackles. Alone in her small apartment, surrounded by echoes of a life she was still untangling, she grappled with the overwhelming loneliness that came with freedom. Yet freedom also brought a fierce clarity. No longer the invisible wife or the dutiful mother who sacrificed her own desires, Amelia began to discover the woman beneath the layers of routine and obligation. Luca remained a complicated thread woven through this new chapter. Sometimes a source of strength, sometimes a reminder of wounds still raw. Their relationship evolved, shifting from the electric forbidden passion of their first encounters into something more nuanced, more fragile. They trained together, shared stories, and challenged each other not just physically but emotionally. Luca's stoic armor cracked little by little, revealing a vulnerability Emilia hadn't expected, a mirror to her own fractured soul. But life's complexities refused to pause for healing. Daniel, though no longer her husband, still hovered in the margins of her life, especially for the sake of their children. Their interactions were tense but civil, a balancing act of co-parenting amid unresolved grief. Emilia wrestled with guilt that no amount of therapy or introspection could fully erase. The ache of knowing her choices had torn her family apart even as they forged a new path forward. Meanwhile, the gym became more than just a place to practice jiu-jitsu. It was a community, a second family, where Emilia's confidence blossomed in ways she never thought possible. She began teaching beginner classes, her voice steady, her instructions precise, guiding others to find strength through struggle. It was in these moments, standing barefoot on the mats, surrounded by sweat and determination, that Emilia truly felt at home. But the past refused to stay buried. One afternoon, Luca received a call that pulled him away unexpectedly, a reminder of the life and demons he still fought beyond the gym's walls. Emilia waited, the silence stretching between her thoughts, wondering if this new chapter could survive the shadows trailing behind them both. She understood now that healing was not linear, that love and pain could coexist, intertwined like the tight grip of a chokehold, sometimes suffocating, sometimes saving. As she prepared for the regional jiu-jitsu tournament, the stakes felt higher than any physical match. This was about reclaiming her identity, proving to herself that she could fight for a future built on truth, resilience, and the courage to face whatever came next. And as the mats awaited, so did the unknown, beckoning Emilia to step forward, not as a wife betrayed, but as a woman reborn through fire and fight. The day of the tournament dawned crisp and clear, the gym buzzing with anticipation and the faint scent of liniment and determination. Emilia stood on the sidelines, her heart pounding not from nerves but from the quiet storm of emotions that had carried her here. Betrayal, loss, forgiveness, and a fierce reclaiming of self. Luca's presence beside her was steady, a silent vow unspoken but deeply felt, reminding her that strength was often found in connection rather than solitude. As the matches began, Emilia moved with a grace and power she hadn't known she possessed, each grip and pivot a testament to the battles she'd fought both on and off the mat. The crowd's cheers faded into a background hum as she focused, her mind sharp, her body responsive, memories of pain transmuting into fuel. With every opponent she faced, she shed pieces of the past, guilt, fear, regret, until only the present moment remained. Luca watched from the sidelines, pride evident in his gaze, knowing this fight was about more than medals or titles. In the final round, Emilia faced a competitor who matched her strength and will, the match a brutal ballet of technique and endurance. When she finally executed the perfect chokehold, it wasn't just a physical victory, it was a symbolic triumph over the chaos that had once threatened to consume her. Later, as the gym emptied and the lights dimmed, Emilia and Luca stood alone on the mats, the silence between them filled with unspoken understanding. There was no need for promises or plans. Only the acknowledgement that their journey, with all its imperfections, had led to a place of healing and hope. Emilia knew the road ahead would still have its shadows, but now she faced it armed with resilience, love, and the unbreakable spirit of a woman who had fought for herself and won. And in that quiet victory she found peace. In the months that followed, Emilia didn't chase redemption, she lived it. The pain didn't vanish, but it softened like scar tissue where open wounds once ached. Her children began to smile again when they were with her, not because the past was forgotten, but because she showed up fully, honestly, and without pretending. Daniel too changed. They didn't become friends, not quite, but there was mutual respect, a quiet understanding that some endings don't need villains, just honesty and the courage to walk away. As for Luca, their story didn't wrap itself in neat ribbons. Some nights he stayed, some nights he disappeared into his own shadows. But Emilia no longer waited for someone to complete her. She stood steady, barefoot on the same mat where she had first remembered what it felt like to breathe again, to fight again. And when she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw a wife or a mistake or a traitor. He saw a woman. Flawed and free. A woman who had dared to break, dared to hurt, dared to heal. And in doing so had discovered that the most powerful hold in life is the one you finally release.